The night officer Dangana dragged the quiet woman into his room. The moon hid its face behind a cloud, as if even the sky refused to witness what power can do when it forgets shame. No drum announced it! No bell! Cried warning. Yet the walls of the police quarters heard the sound of a door closing like a coffin lid. In the morning, the woman walked out with dust on her knees and silence wrapped tight around her throat. Those who saw her said nothing, because fear is a padlock the tongue often wears. But the earth, which drinks every tear, had already begun to remember. In the village of Ndiagu, people liked to say, "Trouble never arrives running. It strolls in, like a visitor who knows where the water pot is kept." The village sat between a red road and a stubborn river, its huts arranged like listening ears around the square. Goats quarreled, children laughed, and elders argued over kola nuts, as if the world had never broken before. Yet just beyond the last compound stood the police barracks, square and pale, like a stranger who had come to stay without greeting anyone's mother. The villagers respected it the way one respects a sleeping leopard carefully from a distance. The woman's name was Mayawa, which means beauty of the market. Though she dressed so simply that strangers often overlooked her, she sold groundnuts in folded paper cones and tied a wrapper without vanity, as if decoration were a language she never learned. Still, people trusted her, because her eyes held the calm of someone who listens to the ground before stepping. Old women said she had the spirit of rain, gentle when falling, stubborn when it decides to flood. But Ebendrein, they admit it, cannot argue with a roof made of iron. Officer Dangana was a man who wore his uniform the way a masquerade wears raffia, so that no one would see the smallness underneath. His boots struck the earth loudly, announcing him before his mouth did, and he liked it that way. He believed authority was not something given, but something seized and shaken until it rattled. When he laughed, it was with his teeth, never his eyes. People greeted him quickly and stepped aside, because a crooked stick can still poke an eye. That Ebenin Mayawa had been returning from the stream with a clay pot balanced on her head when his voice called her. It was not a loud call, but it carried the weight of command, the way thunder carries rain inside it. He asked why she had not greeted him properly the day before, though she had, and she answered with careful respect. He circled her slowly, like a trader inspecting goods he had not yet paid for. The path grew quiet, for even crickets know when not to sing. He told her she must come to the station to answer a question. She asked what question, and he smiled the smile of someone who enjoys holding keys to doors others cannot see. A palm wine tapper passing nearby slowed, then hurried on, suddenly remembering an urgent place he must be. Mayawa followed because refusal, in the presence of a gun, is a language few survive speaking. The clay pot remained by the roadside, water seeping into the dust like a secret escaping. Inside the barracks compound, the air smelled of sweat, old paper, and something sour that clung to the nose. He led her past a desk, past a chair, past the place where questions should have lived, and stopped at a narrow door. She understood then, not with her mind, but with that deep place where truth strikes before words form. She said softly that she was like his sister, like his daughter, like any woman whose name should be protected. He answered by closing the door. When she stepped out much later, the night insects had grown tired of waiting, and the moon had climbed high again, pretending innocence. She walked straight, though her shadow trembled on the ground like a frightened child. A watchman across the yard saw her and looked away quickly, adjusting his cap as if it had asked him a difficult question. She did not cry, because some pains are too proud for tears. Instead, she walked home, each step whispering something the soil did not forget. By dawn, whispers had begun moving through Ndiagu, like smoke through rafters. No one said the story aloud, yet everyone tasted it in the air. Women paused while sweeping, men paused while tying goats, children paused amid, all sensing that something heavy had been placed upon the village's chest. The elders muttered that when one person's dignity is stolen, the whole clan walks naked without knowing. And as the sun rose red and watchful, a single thought pressed into every heart. Would Ndiago remain many people, or had fear already turned them into one long silence? Morning did not wake Ndiago gently that day. It arrived like a messenger who had run all night, with bad news in his mouth. The roosters crowed, yet their voices sounded cracked, as if they too had swallowed dust. Women who normally swept their compounds with easy rhythm now dragged their brooms slowly, drawing crooked lines in the sand. Even the sun seemed unsure of itself. climbing the sky in pale hesitation. For when a wrong has entered a village, light itself must ask permission before shining. No one mentioned Mayawa's name at first. Instead they spoke of weather, of goats, of the price of gari in the next town, circling truth the way cautious hunters circle a bush that may hide a snake. But silence has a smell, and by mid-morning it hung thick as overripe fruit. A child finally asked his mother why the groundnut woman walked like someone carrying a pot inside her chest. The mother hushed him quickly and glanced around, for children's questions are arrows that do not know how to miss. And so the story began to leak, not through mouths, but through eyes. Mayawa herself said nothing. She sat outside her hut with a tray of unshelled nuts, cracking them one by one, her fingers steady as drumsticks. Those who passed greeted her carefully, their voices soft with the politeness people use near graves. She answered each greeting with the same calm nod, neither inviting talk nor refusing it. A lizard darted across her foot and paused, as if waiting for her to react. But she did not move. It is said that when a person's spirit is busy speaking with pain, the body becomes only a borrowed wrapper. At the village square, the elders gathered under the nuku tree, whose roots rose from the soil like old fingers. They did not call it a meeting, because naming a thing gives it legs, yet their feet had all brought them there. One elder cleared his throat and spoke of the harvest, though everyone knew yam season was months away. Another praised the strength of youth these days, though no youth stood nearby. At last the oldest among them said quietly that a man who watches his neighbor's roof burn must be ready to warm himself with the ashes. The proverb fell between them like a stone into a shallow pot. Some nodded, but others shifted uneasily on their stools. They spoke of danger, of rifles, of the government whose ears stretched farther than rivers. One said the matter concerned only the woman and the officer, like a quarrel between two goats on a narrow bridge. Another warned that a village which pokes a soldier's pride invites boots into its soup. Fear spoke many languages that morning, and all of them sounded wise. Yet wisdom that protects cowardice is only foolishness wearing spectacles. While the elders argued in low voices, Officer Dangana strode through the market in full uniform, his belt shining like a boast. He bought roasted meat without paying and chewed it slowly, letting grease glisten on his lips. Traders greeted him with bent heads, their smiles stretched thin as old cloth. He enjoyed the way people stepped aside before he even reached them. Power, he believed, was sweetest when others tasted its bitterness. He saw Mayawa before she saw him. She was arranging her ground nuts in careful rows, as if order could stitch the world back together. He stopped in front of a stall and let his shadow fall across her tray. Sa looked up come as Stillwater and greeted him the way one greets any pass. For a moment he frowned, not because she had insulted him, but because she had not trembled. "Woman," he said, loud enough for nearby ears, "you did not report back as I instructed." The traders froze, their hands hovering above goods, like birds unsure where to land. Mayawa answered that she knew of no instruction except to live peacefully. A ripple moved through the onlookers, quick and nervous. A man dropped a mango, and no one bent to pick it up. Dangana laughed, but there was a crack in it, thin as a line in dry earth. He told her she must come again that night for further questioning. She nodded once, not submissive, not defiant, simply acknowledging that words had been spoken. This unsettled him more than insults would have done, for anger is a drum a man can beat, but calm as a forest where he can lose his way. He spat near her feet and walked off, his boots louder than before. When he was gone, the market breathed again. Women began speaking all at once, their whispers colliding like startled birds. One said the matter had gone too far. Another said a chick that challenges a hawk should first write its will. A third muttered that the ancestors were surely watching, because injustice leaves footprints even spirits can follow. Mayawa continued arranging her nuts, yet her hands had begun to move in a slow, steady rhythm like someone counting. That evening clouds gathered, though the season was wrong for rain. The air pressed down on rooftops, heavy and listening. In his quarters, Dangana polished his boots and smiled to himself, already tasting the obedience he expected the night would bring. Across the village, mothers called their children indoors earlier than usual, though none could say why. And as the first distant rumble rolled across the darkening sky, a question crept into every corner of Indiaguif. One person asked power could wound a woman. What might happen if the woman's silence finally answered back? The night did not fall. It gathered. Darkness drew itself over Indiago, like a wrapper pulled tight by a widow, heavy with meaning and not easily loosened. Even the crickets seemed to whisper instead of sing, as though sound itself feared being overheard. Smoke from cooking fires rose straight upward and did not drift, a sign the old hunters said meant spirits were standing still to watch. And in the hut of Mayawa, a small lamp burned without flicker, its flame thin and stubborn. She sat before it with her hands folded, not praying, not sleeping, simply listening. Outside, footsteps passed, now and then, each one slowing near her wall before hurrying on again. News travels fastest at night because darkness carries secrets the way baskets carry cola nuts. Somewhere an owl called once, twice, then stopped, as if it too waited for permission. Mayawa lifted her head slightly, the way a person does when hearing a distant drum no one else notices. In another part of the village, the elders sat awake on their mats. Age teaches a man that sleep does not always bring rest, especially when conscience is shaking his shoulder. The oldest among them cleared his throat and spoke into the darkness, though no one had asked him to. He said a clan that swallows injustice is feeding a sickness that will one day eat its children. No one answered, but several men shifted, their mats rustling like dry leaves. Meanwhile, Officer Dangana prepared himself as though for a celebration. He splashed water on his face, tied his belt tighter, and admired his reflection in a small, cracked mirror. To him, the night was not heavy. It was ripe. He believed he was the hunter and the village merely bush to be parted. A man who thinks himself a leopard forgets that even leopards can step into traps laid by silence. Wind rose. It did not rush or howl. It moved slowly, deliberately, like a messenger who knows his words will wound. Palm fronds shivered, though no hand touched them. Doors creaked on their hinges, opening a finger's width, then closing again. Dogs lifted their noses and whined softly, tails tucked, as if a stranger had entered wearing no footsteps. Mayawa stood. She did not hurry. She lifted her lamp, blew it out, and stepped into the night with the calm of someone answering a call she had long expected. The darkness wrapped her gently, recognizing her shape. When she walked, the dust did not rise beneath her feet. Those who watched from cracks in their doors would later swear she did not cast a shadow. At the barracks, Dangana heard the knock. It was not loud, yet it struck the wood with the certainty of a judge's staff. He smiled before opening, already tasting triumph like pepper on his tongue. When he pulled the door wide and saw her standing there, his smile widened further. He told himself her quietness meant surrender. Pride is a mask that blinds the wearer more than the watcher. She stepped inside, without waiting to be invited. The room smelled of sweat, polish, and old smoke. A lantern on the table burned low, its light bending around her face, as if unsure where to settle. Dangana shut the door with his foot and leaned against it, folding his arms. He said she was learning obedience, and that obedience was the first wisdom of the powerless. Mayawa tilted her head slightly. "My mother," she said softly, "taught me another wisdom." Her voice was calm, yet it carried through the room like a bell sounded under water. He smirked and asked what lesson a poor woman could teach about power. She answered that one broomstick breaks easily, but a bundle sweeps the compound clean. The proverb lingered in the air between them. Elauget. But the laugh came late, as though it had lost its way before reaching his mouth. He told her she stood alone now, and alone she would remain. He spread his hands to show the empty room, the silent walls, the distance between her and the village. Even the lantern flame dipped, as if listening to see whether the walls agreed. She did not argue. Instead she asked, "Are you alone?" The question struck him oddly. He frowned and glanced around, half expecting someone to be crouched in a corner. "Say no one," he scoffed and said yes. Of course he was alone. "Power," he added, "needs no witnesses." Yet his voice had lowered without his permission. Mayawa nodded slowly. Outside, the wind pressed against the barracks walls. The wood answered with a long, low groan. Somewhere beyond the compound fence, a dog barked once, sharply, then fell silent. The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded. She took one step closer. Dangana felt it, then not fear. Not yet, but something like the moment before a storm breaks. When the air tastes of metal, he straightened, annoyed at his own unease, and reached out as if to seize her wrist. His fingers stopped a hair's breadth from her skin. For the first time that night, his hand hesitated, because the lantern flame had changed. It stretched tall and thin, its light paling until her face seemed carved from moonlight rather than flesh. The room cooled, though the door and windows were shut. The smell of earth after rain filled the air, rich and deep and ancient, and from somewhere he could not say where came the faint sound of many feet shifting at once. Dangana swallowed. "What trick is this?" he demanded, but his voice had begun to dry. Mayawa's eyes held his steady as stones at the bottom of a river. She said nothing, yet her silence pressed against him harder than a shout. A proverb his grandmother once told him stirred unwillingly in his memory. When the forest stands together, even the tiger must walk carefully. The wind outside rose again. This time it did not wander. It circled, the walls creaked, the lantern shivered, and the air thickened until breathing felt like pushing through cloth. Dangana's ears rang faintly, as though distant drums had begun to beat beneath the ground. He opened his mouth to speak, and froze, for the sound beneath the floor was no longer faint. It was footsteps, many footsteps, and they were coming closer. The footsteps did not hurry, and that was what tightened Dangana's chest. They rose from beneath the floor, like seeds pushing through soil, steady, patient, certain of their direction. Each step sounded soft, yet together they carried the weight of a marching crowd. The boards trembled faintly, not as wood trembles from wind, but as earth trembles when remembering something buried. In that moment he understood a truth no uniform had ever taught him. There are sounds that do not belong to the ears but to the conscience. He told himself it was a trick. A man who has lived by frightening others does not easily admit when fear has come visiting him. He barked that she should stop whatever game she was playing, that he was an officer of the law, that he feared no villager born of woman. His words marched out bravely, yet his voice limped behind them. Mayawa did not answer, and her silence spread through the room like spilled oil, touching every corner. The lantern flame stretched taller. It bent toward her as grass bends toward a river. Shadows slid along the wall, lengthening until they no longer resembled the bodies that cast them. The footsteps below grew clearer, and now he could hear something else within them, the faint murmur of many voices speaking at once, too low to understand, yet too present to deny. Sweat gathered at the back of his neck, though the air had turned cool as river stone. He stamped his boot on the floor. The sound cracked sharply, but the footsteps did not stop. Instead they answered, rising one pace closer, as if the ground itself had accepted his challenge. Dangana's mouth dried. He stamped again, harder, and the boards shuddered like a drum struck by an unseen hand. Still the steps came, calm and unafraid, until his own heartbeat began to stumble, trying to match their rhythm. "Mayawa," he said, and now her name came out thin. She looked at him not with anger, not with triumph, but with a patience so deep it felt older than speech. "You said you were alone?" she murmured. Her voice carried gently, yet it pressed against his ribs like a firm palm. "Listen well. Tell me again if you're alone." A proverb drifted through his memory like smoke. When a man says he stands alone, he should first ask the ground whose back he is using. The floor creaked. A long line split across one plank, no wider than a fingernail, yet dark as a wound. From it seeped the smell of damp earth, rich and heavy, the scent of graves after rain. The murmuring voices swelled, no longer faint, and though he could not make out the words, he felt their meaning gather around him like a tightening circle. His hands, which had once struck men without trembling, now hovered uselessly at his sides. Outside, the wind circled the barracks. It moved not like air, but like intention, brushing the walls, slipping through cracks, pressing its ear to the door. In the village, sleepers turned on their mats, frowning in dreams they would not remember. The oldest elder sat up suddenly, heart pounding, and whispered to the darkness that the earth was speaking. For the land does not shout when angered. It whispers until only the guilty can hear. Inside the room, the crack widened. Dust lifted from the floor and hung in the air, each grain glinting in the lantern light like a watching eye. Dangana stumbled back a step. He told himself to reach for his rifle leaning in the corner, yet his feet would not obey. Power had always lived in his limbs before. Now it seemed to have packed its load and departed without farewell. Mayawa moved. Not quickly, not slowly, simply with the certainty of rain falling when clouds are full. She stepped nearer to the crack and looked down into it. The lantern flame leaned again, stretching its thin neck as though it too wished to see. The murmuring grew louder, and now he could swear he heard words forming beneath the earth. Layered voices speaking one through another. They sounded neither angry nor kind, only sure. His throat tightened. "What is there?" he whispered, though he did not want to know. She did not look up. "What has always been there?" she replied. "What stands when people sit? What speaks when people swallow their tongues?" Her tone held no threat, yet it struck him harder than a blow. The plank split wider with a dull, final crack. A thin line of darkness opened like an eye, and from it rose a breath of cold air that smelled of clay, roots, and old rain. The murmuring voices lifted together, no longer hidden, and the room filled with the sound of many unseen throats speaking as one. Dangana staggered back until his shoulders struck the door. For the first time since he had worn a uniform, he felt smaller than the space he stood in, and from the opening in the floor, something began to rise. What rose from the opening did not rush, because things that carry truth do not need haste. First came mist, thin as breath on a mirror, curling upward in pale threads that smelled of rain-soaked soil. Then came sound, a layered murmur like many elders speaking beneath one roof, their tones woven together so tightly no single voice could be pulled free. The lantern flame bowed low, shrinking as though it recognized an authority older than fire. And Dangana, who had never bowed to any living soul, felt his knees loosen without permission. The mist thickened until it shaped itself, not into a body as flesh knows bodies, but into a presence, the way a crowd becomes a single will. Within it flickered faces old, young, scarred, smooth-appearing, and fading like reflections on troubled water. Some war marks of age, others the brightness of youth. Yet all shared the same gaze, steady, unblinking, patient as stone. The murmuring voices blended into one tone that filled the room without shouting. It was the sound of many agreeing. Dangana pressed his back harder against the door. His breath came shallow, quick, like a goat that smells blood on the wind. He told himself this was a dream, or madness, or a trick of smoke and night. But a dream does not chill a man's bones, and madness does not carry the scent of ancestral earth. He tried to lift his hand, to command, to threaten. Yet his arm hung heavy as wet cloth. The proverb his mother once spoke slipped into his mind. The hand that beats the drum must answer the dancers. Mayawa stood beside the rising mist. Her wrapper stirred gently, though no breeze touched it. The pale glow from the floor traced her face in silver lines, making her eyes seem deeper than wells. She did not smile, yet neither did she frown. She looked as one who has been waiting for companions to arrive. The voices spoke, not loudly, not fiercely, but together. "We are here." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of hills. Dangana's teeth clicked once as his jaw tightened. He searched for another sound wind. Insects, anything but the world outside the room, had drawn back, listening. For what? Croaked. The mist shifted. Faces formed again within it, clearer now, like carvings emerging from wood beneath a patient knife. For what was taken, the voices said. For what was silenced, for what was swallowed. When fear closed many mouths, each phrase settled onto his shoulders, like a stone laid carefully, not thrown. And with each one, the room seemed to grow smaller. His thoughts scrambled like startled rats. He wanted to shout that he was the law, that no spirit could question him, that uniforms were shields against consequence. But the words would not gather. They slipped apart before reaching his tongue. For the first time in many seasons, he understood how a man feels when the crowd he has mocked finally stands. Mayawa spoke. Then, "You asked if I was alone." Her voice was quiet, yet it traveled farther than any shout he had ever heard. She lifted her hand slightly toward the mist, not pointing, not commanding, simply acknowledging. "This is the answer." The presence hummed softly, like bees agreeing with a flower. Dangana shook his head. "No," he whispered, though he did not know whether he argued with her or with the truth pressing in. Sweat slid along his temples, cold as morning dew. They cannot be here. But denial is a door made of smoke. Even a child can walk through it. The voices did not rise in anger. They only deepened, like a river after rain. "We have always been here." The words circled him slowly. "When one cries, we hear. When one is wronged, we remember. When many stay silent, we wait." The lantern flickered once, twice, as if nodding to each line. The floor beneath him vibrated faintly, not a shake of violence, but a pulse, steady as a heartbeat. He felt it through his boots, up his legs, into his chest, until it seemed his own heart was copying its rhythm. His breath tried to match it, and failed. A man who is ruled by fear seldom knows how to breathe when fear rules him. Outside, beyond the barracks walls, dogs lifted their heads. They did not bark "Tay." Listen. In their compounds, villagers stirred again in uneasy sleep, turning toward the direction of the station as sunflowers turned toward light. The oldest elder opened his eyes in the dark and whispered, "It has begun." For he knew what others only felt. When the ground itself speaks, judgment has already taken a seat. Inside, the mist leaned closer to Danga. He felt no touch, yet his skin prickled as if brushed by 1,000 unseen fingers. The many faces within the pale swirl watched him, not with rush, not with mercy, but with certainty. The certainty that follows a deed, the way shadow follows body. And then the voices asked, gentle as falling dust, yet heavier than iron, "Will you stand alone now, or will you answer to all?" Dangana tried to answer, but his tongue lay in his mouth like a stranger who refused to recognize him. The question from the mist did not fade. It waited, patient as a creditor who knows the debtor cannot run forever. His knees trembled, and he felt the strange urge to kneel, though no hand pushed him. All his life he had believed power stood upright, chin high, voice loud. Yet now he understood another proverb his father once muttered. While mending a net, the tallest Iroko falls the loudest. When the forest decides, it is time. "Aye!" The word cracked like dry wood in his throat. His eyes darted toward Mayawa, hoping to find anger there. For anger he understood and could fight. But her gaze held only steadiness, the calm of a river that has seen storms come and go without forgetting its path. That calm frightened him more than any blade, because it offered no foothold for his pride. Behind her, the gathered presence of many souls seemed to lean closer, not threatening, only waiting, as dawn waits for night to finish speaking. "I did nothing, Esaida." Less though the words staggered, the mist stirred, and the many faces within it shifted, not in rage, but in recognition, as if they had heard the same sentence from many mouths across many years. The floor pulsed again beneath his boots, slow and certain. "Nothing." The voices echoed softly, and the word changed shape as they spoke it, becoming not a defense, but a mirror. In that mirror, Dangana saw not his uniform, not his badge, not his swagger, but a small boy who once knew shame before he learned how to bury it. His legs gave way. He fell to his knees with a dull thud, the sound of pride meeting earth. No lightning struck him, no invisible hand forced him down. It was his own weight that lowered him. His breath came ragged, and the room smelled now not of polish or sweat, but of soil after rain. The scent of beginnings and endings mixed together. Mayawa watched quietly, her hands resting at her sides, while the gathered voices hummed like distant drums. And in that humming, he heard something he had never allowed himself to hear before. The sound of people standing together. Outside, the wind loosened its circle. Across Niago, sleepers stirred and opened their eyes, unsure why relief moved through them like cool water. The oldest elder sat up and nodded once to the darkness, for he felt the shift the way fishermen feel a net grow heavy with catch. Dogs lay their heads back down. Palm leaves settled. The village, which had held its breath without knowing, exhaled. Inside the barracks, Dangana bowed his head. The mist drew nearer, its many faces no longer distant shapes, but clear presences, watching as witnesses watch a verdict spoken. "You are not alone," the voices said. and now their tone carried, not question, but truth. No deed stands by itself. It walks with the feet of all who allow it. The words settled over him like a cloth, not suffocating, but impossible to shrug away. His shoulders shook. He began again, and this time the word did not crack. I wronged her. The confession slipped out, small, yet the moment it touched the air, the floor's trembling seat, the lantern flames steadied, even the night outside seemed to lean closer to listen. For truth, once spoken, travels faster than lies ever can. Mayawa inclined her head slightly, not in triumph, not in forgiveness, but in acknowledgement, as one acknowledges rain after drought. A single hand can break a branch, she said gently, but it cannot rebuild the tree. Her eyes lifted toward the gathered presence. That is work for many. The mist brightened faintly, like dawn behind clouds. The voices answered, softer now. Then let many remember. Slowly, like breath released, the pale shapes began to thin. One by one the faces faded, not vanishing but sinking, returning the way roots return to soil after lifting a stone. The crack in the floor closed with a faint sigh, leaving only wood where darkness had been. Silence filled the room. Not the fearful silence of before, but a resting silence, like a field after harvest. Dangana remained kneeling, his uniform creased, his head bowed, the weight of his own admission settling around him like a new skin. Mayawa turned toward the door and opened it. Cool night air entered, carrying the smell of earth and distant cooking fires. She stepped out. No trumpet marked her going. No drum praised her courage, yet the night itself seemed to make space for her feet. She walked past the yard, past the fence, onto the path leading home. Behind her, in the small room, a man stayed kneeling, learning at last what power truly is. For power held alone is a gourd with a cracked bottom, but power shared is a river that cannot be stopped. By morning, the story had already begun its journey. Children would repeat it while chasing goats. Women would murmur it over grinding stones. Elders would nod and add proverbs to its bones, until it stood tall enough to cast shade. And whenever someone boasted too loudly of strength, another would smile and ask quietly, "Are you standing alone, or is the ground standing with you?"